here we are back again in class. We had a series of teachings on Secret Tantra, and then we had 2 weeks break. Geshe says, I don't know, those 15 days, they just evaporated. They disappeared very quickly. And here we are back again. This time we will have a series of 6 sessions on how to correctly keep the Bodhisattva vows. So in terms of the Bodhisattva vows, we need to understand that in the Buddha Shakyamuni himself and in all the great texts, the classic texts, we find this presentation of 3 classes of vows. First of all, we have vows of individual liberation, we have vows, the Bodhisattva vows, and we have tantric vows. Again, in Abhidharma, we find mention of other types of vows, such as vows of absorption or concentration. In addition to that, we know that we have, for example, refuge vows and so forth. So there are a number of different classes or types of vows, but from amongst them, the Bodhisattva vows are supreme. Actually, Bodhisattva vows are indispensable for obtaining the state of omniscience. It is impossible to obtain Buddhahood if you cannot properly keep and maintain your Bodhisattva vows. So to be able to properly keep purely the Bodhisattva vows, what we need to become aware is states that are incompatible, basically states that sabotage your Bodhisattva vows. And once you recognize those, you will be in a much better position to safeguard the Bodhisattva vows. The thing is that in every activity that we do, incompatible states or faults and good qualities come hand in hand. They're always present. So part of our effort is to identify what faults are there, what weaknesses are there, and try to remove those or try to disassociate ourselves from those things. And then just put a lot of effort on developing the positive sides of the qualities. So, as we say, the most important step here will be to identify states that go against or are incompatible to our Bodhisattva vows. And in this, we will go through the presentation of the 18 root downfalls and the 46 secondary negativities. And as part of our training, every day we should engage in this private examination and see how many of those things, the faults, I generate every day within my mind. Okay, so it's very important to understand here that to properly generate the Bodhisattva vows, you must have bodhicitta. We see this in the writings of Master Asanga in Bodhisattva Bhumi, where he posits the question and he says, child of the lineage, are you a bodhisattva or are you someone who is merely aspiring to reach Buddhahood? If you are not a bodhisattva, I cannot pass on to you the bodhisattva vows. I cannot confer the bodhisattva vows. So it is important to understand the meaning of this question or the meaning of this statement. So, in other words, what we say here is that in order to generate the Bodhisattva vows, you must have generated bodhicitta. And the ways of generating bodhicitta is by following any of the 2 methods, the 7-fold cause and effect method and the method of equalizing and exchanging self for others. In terms of these 2 methods, the second, the method of equalizing and exchanging self for others, it's a more difficult process. It has more difficult steps for us to follow. First of all, we have to develop this attitude of equalizing, and on the basis of that equalizing, we then have to develop this exchange of attitude and practice Tonglen. So it is a more difficult method. However, as we say, it is indispensable this method. And although it might be difficult, it doesn't mean that we should completely avoid it or abandon it. Because, as we say, in order to achieve perfect happiness, we must reach the goal of omniscience. Without reaching that goal, whatever happiness we experience is only temporary. So for a couple of days, you might find yourself in a joyous situation, everything is favorable, and so forth. But you will find that very soon, after a couple of days, the situation will change. And again, you will experience suffering. So if you're looking for perfect happiness, you're looking for the state of omniscience. And to obtain the state of omniscience, it is indispensable that you develop bodhicitta. And even though the method of equalizing and exchanging self for others is difficult, nevertheless, it is something that we should be willing to engage. So it's very important here to recognize that there is a connection, right? We talk about Bodhisattva vows, but Bodhisattva vows are related to bodhicitta. You must have generated bodhicitta. So bodhicitta and Bodhisattva vows are related. And again, for the Bodhisattva vows, because these are things that you have to protect, you must understand what is involved in terms of the commitments or the things that you should avoid having taken those vows. So we talk about the method of equalizing and exchanging self and others. So just look at these words, self and others. So self obviously relates to yourself, and you are one single person. And others refers to everybody else, all others, except for yourself. So you have to stop and consider now, who is more important, me, the single person, or everybody else? So there is this issue of self and others, and we constantly have thoughts about me, myself. I come, I go, I eat, I drink, I this, I that. Okay, so constantly we're thinking about I, myself. But if you investigate, can you find this I, this self? Actually, we see that because we apply this division between self and others, then very strong attitudes come from this division. We very strongly cherish ourselves and we ignore others. And, this division between self and others, it comes from being, identifying others as being different individuals, right? Or different lineage or, different mind stream. Okay. It's not a division between who is better and who is worse. If we go down that line to make the division between self and others and apply the thought that I am better and they are worse than me, then actually this attitude is an attitude that will create even more suffering for us. So, for example, if you carry this attitude that you are superior, you are better than anybody else, this actually affects the way that you relate to other people. So if we take, let's say someone has this attitude, and imagine that person works in the office, right? Has colleagues. So the way they look at others, the way they express themselves, the things that come out of their mouth actually will be indicative of this idea they have that they are superior. And this is not something that is welcomed by the colleagues. So the other people in the office, they say, oh, look at this person. They have such a high opinion of themselves. Look at what they said. Look at what they did, and so forth. So it's seen as a fault. Have a drink because Bodhisattva vows are difficult. So it is very important that we never distinguish between self and others and develop this attitude of cherishing ourselves and completely ignoring the needs or the situation of others. Having this attitude will not allow us to accumulate any virtue, will not allow us to progress along the paths and the grounds that lead to omniscience. We will not develop any qualities whatsoever. So if someone harms you, obviously you consider that person as an enemy. And if you hear that something bad happened to them, their car broke down, their house caught fire, I don't know, something, they got sick, or, they're experiencing some difficulty and so forth, you sort of like delight in those news, and you think, oh, good, I'm glad to hear this. They deserve it, this and worse. If any of those things were to happen to you, like your car broke down, or your house was on fire, or you were sick, you would consider all these occurrences as calamities, as horrible things, right? And you would say, oh, I wish those things wouldn't happen. So what we have to understand is, just as I do not wish for any of those bad things to happen to me, I do not wish for any suffering to happen to me. Similarly, this applies to all others. They don't wish any suffering. So this type of attitude is something that we need to develop within society, and we should not have that attitude of being really watching everything from a distance. From a distance, you might say, oh, such bad things happen in the world. So what happens is that usually we sympathize when, let's say, something bad happens to people that we feel connected, and not so much to people who are far away. And if you examine how, let's say, society is organized, we see that society is organized in different groups. So you have this group of people that work in the same building, or this group of people who work for the same company, or this group of people that come from the same village, right? Or this group of people that are a family. And when something bad happens to someone who belongs in the same group with you, you have much more empathy for that person. So let's say this person's car broke down, and you say, oh, my colleague's car broke down, and you empathize because you feel you're in the same group. Whereas if you hear someone's car in India broke down and you don't know this person, and you don't have links with that person, it's just you don't even discuss it. You don't spend any time thinking about someone's car in India broke down. Yeah. So Geshe was saying it's actually something that happens quite a lot in the monastery, where we have lots of people. They might come from the same village or from the same area with you, or not, and obviously others who are not. And you see, sometimes, because we live in close proximity in the monastery, there can be tension, right? Like you do not forgive, or you do not allow, you don't make allowances for people with whom you don't feel connected. You don't feel you belong in the same group. I guess it's happened a few times. I've experienced that as well. So it's very important in that first step of practicing equalizing self and others to understand that whatever happiness I wish to experience, others also wish to experience the same happiness. And whatever suffering I wish to avoid, they also wish to avoid this. And therefore, this also should come with an attitude, cultivating an attitude of tolerance, of patience towards others. So this is the first step, the step of equalizing. The second step, the step of exchanging self for others, that is a bit more difficult to understand. Exchanging self for others, it doesn't mean that the person over there will come over here and we will swap places and I will go over there. It doesn't mean this. So here the exchange refers to an exchange of intention or attitude. So what we need to exchange here is, instead of cherishing ourselves, to begin cherishing others. So the object of our cherishing is what is exchanged, what changes over. And that is very important, because the important principle to understand here is that by establishing the purpose of others or the well-being of others, your own purpose is also taken care of as a byproduct. And we know this through experience. So let's say if you interact with others in a very nice, helpful, polite way, always talk to them in a supportive way, you create an atmosphere that so that in the future, if you need help yourself, these people will be willing to turn around and also help you and support you. So it's very important to have a very open-minded attitude, because often what happens, the problem begin because we become very narrow-minded. So from a type of mind that is very small and very limited, a lot of problems can arise. That small thing is then exaggerated through imputing, exaggerating, having additional thoughts, and that flares up your anger. And the next thing you know, you are totally disturbed. You cannot sleep at night. You cannot enjoy your food. You're just angry. So the small thing becomes exaggerated and becomes very full blown out anger. So we should avoid that. So it's very important, especially, like older people, they tend not to react too much. But younger people, and especially if you're a busy person who goes out every day, goes to the office every day, you interact with many people every day, there are many opportunities there for your mind to start working in a negative way. So it's very important. If you are active and you're meeting a lot of people every day, try to cultivate patience. And so I guess I was saying, sometimes people say, why should I practice patience? They did this and this to me, or they mistreated me, and so forth. But actually, no, it's good. You can practice patience, and you can see that if you treat that person in a civilized manner, so, you have a pleasant conversation, you maintain a pleasant conversation, you shake hands with that person, you go through these civilities, then you will see that the relationship will also change accordingly. This is how these things work. Okay, so it's very important to understand how through the method of equalizing and exchanging self for others, we develop bodhicitta. So as we say, through the process of equalizing and exchanging yourself for others, you generate bodhicitta. And from there, you can take the Bodhisattva vows. When we take the Bodhisattva vows, we make the promise. So now here, there are different ways of doing this. You can go through a ritual. So you're repeating a particular text that guides you through a repetition. But basically, it says that from now on, in order to reach the state of Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, I will train in the 6 perfections of generosity, ethics, and so forth, and the 4 means of gathering disciples, and I will train properly in all those things. So you might do it through following a ritual, but also you can just make a promise in front of the statue, or the 3 jewels, representing the 3 representations of the 3 jewels, and so forth. So Rinpoche, in his text, The Main Path to Enlightenment, that discusses the Bodhisattva vows, says that the Bodhisattva vows are supreme amongst all other vows, and they have 4 features. The first feature is that they are the highest vows, meaning having taken the Bodhisattva vows, there are no other vows that are more precious, more important, higher than the Bodhisattva vows. And when you hear that, probably the first thought that comes into your mind is, oh, tantric vows. After the Bodhisattva vows, we take the tantric vows. So the tantric vows must be higher than the Bodhisattva vows. But no, the Bodhisattva vows are the most precious vows. The second feature is having taken the Bodhisattva vows, the result in terms of the merit is immeasurable. So the accumulation of merit that you build up if you abide properly on the Bodhisattva vows is unfathomable. The third feature is that it is the supreme intention to benefit all other sentient beings. Then the fourth feature of the Bodhisattva vows is that it becomes the antidote for indecent behavior of our body, our speech, and our mind towards other sentient beings. Because if you look at the 18 root downfalls and the 46 secondary negative activities, all of these are negative behavior, mostly of body and speech, towards others. And if you maintain the Bodhisattva vows, they become the antidote that overcomes, eliminates all this negative type of activity. So then, if we look at the Bodhisattva vows can act as the basis, and the person who have the Bodhisattva vows can be either a lay person or an ordained person. But also we see that the Bodhisattva vows can be found in gods. So let's say that in this life you took the Bodhisattva vows and you maintain the Bodhisattva vows properly, you generated bodhicitta, you develop familiarity with keeping the Bodhisattva vows. And then you die, you pass away from this life, and you are reborn as a god. When you are reborn as a god, because of that previous familiarity with the Bodhisattva vows, you don't need to take anew the Bodhisattva vows in the presence of the abbot through following a ritual and so forth. Due to the previous familiarity, you can generate the vows through that. Okay, so also, for example, other types of beings, such as the Nagas, they might generate bodhicitta, they might take the Bodhisattva vows, and so forth. So in general, this is something that can be found in all 6 types of migration. However, in terms of the basis, the physical basis for taking the Bodhisattva vows or generating the Bodhisattva vows, whether we can posit it as being all 6 types of migration, that's something to be examined. So Geshe says, I don't have a definite scriptural authority reference that specifically identify the Nagas as being the type of being on the basis of a type of being that can generate bodhisattva vows and so forth. However, Geshe says, I remember in Abhidharma, there is a discussion and it brings the Nagas as an example of beings who have bodhisattva vows. So, for example, if we look at the different types of migration, we have the hell beings, we have the hungry ghosts at the lower scale, and the Nagas are considered to be higher in terms of migration, in terms of the hell beings and the hungry ghosts. Okay, then it's interesting to look at the nature of the Bodhisattva vows. The different schools have their own interpretation of what a vow is. So, for example, the mind-only school, when it discusses vows, says that the vows are awareness. The Great Exposition School posits the vows as being material that appears as the ethics of avoiding the three physical negative actions and the four verbal negative actions. For the middle way consequence school, it remains to. There's great debate, there's great examination as to exactly what is the nature of the vows, whether they should be considered as a subtle form and so forth. Okay, so there is a question here about exactly what is the nature of the Bodhisattva vows, whether it is awareness or whether it is subtle form. The other thing that we should keep in mind with the Bodhisattva vows is that Bodhisattva vows are not over there, somewhere over there, and I'm over here. In other words, Bodhisattva vows are not separate from my mind. I have generated bodhicitta, and then I have gone through the ritual of generating or taking the bodhisattva vows, and therefore I have generated the bodhisattva vows in my mind stream. Bodhisattva vows are within my mind. They're not out there, outside, separate of me. So it's very important to have that recognition when you take the Bodhisattva vows, that I have them, they are within my mind. Now, once I have taken the Bodhisattva vows, it is important to have the thought that says, I will keep them properly. I will keep them properly means I will make sure my vows are not sullied, are not affected by any of those negativities. So one particular individual can actually obtain many different types of vows within their mind stream. So, for example, let's say you have a fully ordained monk, a gelong, who takes an initiation. And then when that person checks what sort of vows they have Genyen vows, they have Getsul vows, they have Bodhisattva vows, they have Tantric vows. So you see, one person can have 3 or 4 types of vows. So, as I say, we can have an individual that takes Bodhisattva vows, and when that person thinks, I have generated the Bodhisattva vows, they have those Bodhisattva vows. And then, in addition to that, they take Tantric vows, and they generate the thought, I have generated the Tantric vows in my mind stream. So that type of person, so we're talking about one person, one individual, can have 2 different types of vows. Now, there's a difference between the vows in terms of their duration. Vows of individual liberation, as we said before, someone is a gelong, right? They have taken ordination, full ordination. Vows of individual liberation are for the duration of this life. And for however long that fully ordained monk is alive, they have the vows, the Genyen vows, the Getsul vows, the Gelong vows. They have those. But when they die, those vows finish. This is how far they go. They go to the end of this life. Whilst the Bodhisattva vows, if bodhicitta has not declined, if the vows have been maintained properly, they continue in your next life. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, so as we say here, one person can have more than one set of vows. Again, let's go with the example of the fully ordained monk. They have the vows of individual liberation, the vows of ordination. And then on top of that, they can have the Bodhisattva vows, they can have the Tantric vows. And through the confidence of their belief that I have generated those vows, then they have the vows. And the text describe this as like there is no conflict. And they say it is as if you bind a rope around the pillars of the building. So you can go around with a rope once, you can go twice, you can go 3 times, and so forth. So there's no conflict. Yeah. Okay, so The other thing is that there is a hierarchy with the vows, as we say, and therefore, it's important to know that if you have higher vows, let's say you have Bodhisattva vows, if you incur a downfall in those bodhisattva vows, not only do you harm the bodhisattva vows, but you harm lesser vows that you have. So, for example, you might have taken Mahayana precepts for 24 hours. So, although those are lower vows, you can harm them if you harm your bodhisattva vows. Oh, okay. Sorry, Geshe, I was saying, no, wait. It's actually tricky to explain this. Definitely goes with vows of individual liberation. So, for example, the one-day vows as compared to the Gelong vows. Okay. So it's interesting because we mentioned the refuge vows before. So the Sagya, the Kagyu, the Nima, they talk about refuge vows. However, Je Rinpoche does not talk about refuge vows. He talks about the refuge precepts. And it says, having understood what is involved in refuge, having understood the precepts, you generate refuge, and then from there you can proceed to take the Bodhisattva vows. However, Geshe was saying, I don't know that perhaps there's a different presentation in China. One year in Bodh Gaya, we met this person, a Chinese person, and we were talking through interpreters. And he was saying, I have faith, that Chinese person was saying, I have faith in all the Buddha lineages. I have great respect for them. I have great respect for Buddhism, practice. However, I'm not a Buddhist because I have not taken the vows of refuge in the presence of an abbot who, through a ceremony, said to me, repeat after me, blah, blah, blah. And now you have generated the refuge vows in your mind stream. So that person was saying that technically he was not a Buddhist because he had not received refuge vows from an abbot. So maybe that's a slightly different tradition in China. So Geshe was saying, I wonder how do they practice? How do they understand this? Because how we understand it is that from your own side, you generate faith and conviction in the objects of refuge, and you decide, I go for refuge to these objects, and I will not go for refuge to any other deity and so forth, to anybody else as my refuge. And then we receive, obviously, explanation on the precepts of things we should practice, things we should avoid from a Lama, and so forth. And we consider these to be the refuge ceremony, isn't it? So we will go through the explanation of the 18 downfalls and the 46 secondary negative actions related to the Bodhisattva vows. And in terms of the vows, there are two things. First of all, what is the method of obtaining the vows? And we have said you need to generate bodhicitta as the basis for taking the Bodhisattva vows. And the second thing is to understand, having obtained the vows, how do you safeguard them so that they do not decline? So imagine that you have a very valuable possession in your home, and once you have brought that thing into your house, you're thinking, okay, now how am I going to keep that object? How am I going to keep it properly? Should I show it to others? Should I keep it hidden? How should I maintain it? And so on and so forth. So it's a similar process. So the way that we protect and safeguard the Bodhisattva vows is to make sure that we do not allow the generation of incompatible state, everything that sabotages the vows. And this refers to the 18 root infractions and the 46 secondary negativities. These things are discussed in Master Shantideva's Compendium of Practice, in Master Chandragomin's 20 verses on the Bodhisattva vows, and in Asanga's Bodhisattva Bhumi, the 10th chapter on the ethical practice of bodhisattvas. Okay, so you might wonder, who gave the list of those 18 root bodhisattva downfalls? Where are those things mentioned in the text? So the scriptural authority is Master Asanga's the Bodhisattva Bhumi in the chapter of ethics of bodhisattvas. There he enumerates the 18 root downfalls. Oh, yeah. Okay. Then we also have the Sutra on Bodhisattva Akasagarbha that mentions root downfalls. Mm-hmm. And also the Sutra of those who are wise in methods or skillful in methods also talks about the root downfalls. Then with the 18 root downfalls, what is important to see is the 4 binding factors. The 4 binding factors are present or are necessary for 16 out of the 18 downfalls. So there are 2 downfalls that occur without necessitating the presence of the 4 binding factors. And these 2 downfalls is the one of harboring wrong views. So thinking, for example, that the 3 jewels don't exist, or the law of karma and effect does not exist, and so forth. So you don't need to have bounding factors in order for the downfall to occur. And the other downfall that does not require them is the one of abandoning bodhicitta. So first of all, you generate a thought that says, I want to reach the state of enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings. And then you stop and think and you say, oh, that means that now I have to practice in the 6 perfections for a very long time, 3 countless great eons. And that seems to be something very difficult and almost like an endless task. I might as well abandon this idea and focus on obtaining just my own benefit. And having generated that thought, you abandon your bodhicitta. So if that happens, it just happens. It doesn't need the 4 binding factors. So again, another thing, the 4 binding factors, these are things that exist within our mind stream. So let's look at those 4 binding factors. The first one is not considering the action to be wrong. So not seeing any fault in this activity. So basically, you have broken your bodhisattva vow, or something one of the 18 root downfalls has occurred, and you look at it, you consider it, and you say, no harm done. That's fine. So you do not generate any regret. So this is the opposite. You have to generate regret, right? You have to see it as a fault. The second of the 4 binding factors is not wishing to abstain from this action in the future. And that means you engage in negative activity today, and this activity is harming yourself, is harming others, but you don't take any measures to stop yourself from repeating the activity. So you do it again tomorrow and the day after. And actually the tendency is the more you keep doing this, the worse it will get, the more negative it will get. And not wishing to abstain from this activity in the future, it shows that you do not have the attitude of restraining yourself. Okay, so this is how it occurs. It is possible that that such a situation arises, and therefore it's very important to check with our minds. So it's very important, if you have the vows, to stop and consider and say, okay, I did something wrong. which is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate because I am a holder of Bodhisattva vows, and it is not something that I want to repeat in the future. I will exercise restraint in the future, and I will confess whatever negativity I have done and make sure in the future I do not repeat this situation. So this is what is required in the case of not wishing to abstain from the action in the future. The third one is taking pleasure in the action and delighting in it. So you can see that this is something that will happen if you do not see the action as wrong, if you don't have any sense of regret. Eventually, that takes you even to the point of rejoicing when you do something that goes against your bodhisattva vows. Which is an extreme case. So it is similar to the case that we mentioned before. Something bad happens to your enemy. And when you hear that someone had a really negative experience, you should be affected. You should be thinking, oh, I hope it won't last, or I hope they will recover. But instead, you rejoice and you think, well done, they deserve it. Let's get together and celebrate, have a party for their misfortune. So unfortunately, these days, you can see in YouTube many examples of this. And there are many countries that wage war against each other. And then you see one fraction or one country, people in one country celebrating the war, celebrating the fact that they have defeated, they have destroyed, they have bombed, another place. So this is really shocking to see. For someone who holds Bodhisattva vows, this type of reaction to the suffering of others is a great fault. Because as we say, we come to the point of taking the Bodhisattva vows after we have generated equalizing self and others. Equalizing self and others is you recognize that whatever suffering you do not want to experience, others also do not want to experience. So there's no space for celebrating in the misery of others. The fourth of the four binding factors is feeling no shame or embarrassment about the action. So these two, shame and embarrassment, different from the point of view of whether it relates to yourself. If it relates to yourself, it's a sense of shame. If it relates to others, it's embarrassment. So if it relates to yourself, you think, I am someone who holds the Bodhisattva vows and I acted in this way. This is totally inappropriate. So this is a sense of shame that makes you shy away from these negative actions. Embarrassment is because you think, if I act in this way, what will people think about me? People will criticize me. And also how inappropriate is that I do these things to others. So that's the distinction between shame and embarrassment, and lacking these two things is one of the four binding factors. So now Master Shantideva in the Compendium of Training says that having taken the Bodhisattva vows, not allowing them to decline and maintain them in a pure state depends on proper reliance on the spiritual master. So what he says here is that having taken the Bodhisattva vows, you have to be able to guard them. And in order to guard them, to safeguard them, someone must explain to you, you must come to understand what are the incompatible states, what sabotages, what weakens your vows. And this explanation will come from your teacher. And therefore, it's very important to have proper reliance on your teacher so that you will receive this explanation and be able to guard them. So as we mentioned, there are various texts that mention those 18 root downfalls. The Bodhisattva Bhumi, the Sutra of Bodhisattva Akashagarbha, the Sutra of the Skillful, but someone has to explain those things to you. So some people might say here that I actually am, there's no danger for me because I have not really generated bodhicitta. I only have aspiring bodhicitta. I don't have actual bodhicitta. I'm not a real bodhisattva. And if I'm not a real bodhisattva, then, those 18 downfalls of the Bodhisattva vows and so forth, I cannot break any of those things. Those things do not apply to me. Those things are relevant to real bodhisattvas. However, this is not the case. We should come to know the 18 and the 46. We should enumerate them every day, become familiar with them every day, because these places great imprints in our mind, so that in the future, when we actually become bodhisattvas, we will already have this familiarity. And in the time being, because we try to modify our behavior according to this, it means that our mind will be much more happy, much more relaxed. We will have less fear. And within the community, there will be much more harmonious interferences. So there's great benefit in keeping those. Okay. Anyway, Geshe is referring to a text that is composed by Tsenchab Tseden Tsewang Samdrup. So it will be slightly, anyway, the translation that we have might be slightly different here and there, but 90% it's the same. So we start with a list of 18. Those 18 are called downfalls. So when you hear the word downfall, immediately you understand that this is something negative. This is something you do not want to have. You do not want to engage in this. It does not benefit you. It doesn't benefit others. So you want to distance yourself from a downfall as much as possible. So, for example, if something happened between you and another person, and you start seeing that your attitude, you start getting aggravated, you're getting angry, you're getting hostile towards that person, it's very good to stop yourself and say, stop it. This attitude is not benefiting them, is not benefiting me. I don't want to go there. I want to distance myself. So this is what a downfall is. You want to distance yourself from that. So in society, usually we say, oh, this is a very bad person because they acted in this negative way towards me. They harmed me. But it's very important always to make the distinction between the person and the negative activity of the person. The negative activity occurred only due to the afflictions existing in the mind of that person, all right? The person itself is not negative. The affliction is negative. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says, have compassion for the person and be totally wrathful and oppose the three poisons of the attachment, the hatred, and so forth. So usually we consider ourselves to be healthy and we say, I'm healthy, nothing's wrong with me. But yes, there is something wrong with us, and that is the four binding factors. The four binding factors that come due to afflictions are with us, and there is no doctor to help you with this type of disease. There's no pill you can take. These things can only be eliminated through personal practice. So the Buddha has given teachings that are categorized in the 84,000 bundles of teachings. The Buddha didn't give these teachings because he thought he was important, that because he have plenty of free time to talk and talk and talk and give that many teachings. He only gave those teachings with the aim of counteracting and destroying afflictions. Okay, so we have come to the end of this session today. We're just about to begin with the enumeration of the 18 root downfalls. Anyway, keep in mind together how the vows are generated, the basis or the type of person who can hold the Bodhisattva vows, just this general introduction that we gave today. It contains some important points.